Why does science regard interaction, existence, and creation as disconnected?
Right? When we're looking at creation, existence, interaction, I said the way science holds this and the way metaphysics hold this is actually really different. Right? Science is trying to provide an explanation of things. And in order to do that, it's essentially needing to compose it purely in terms of symmetric relationships, purely in terms of causal or deterministic representations or answers to why questions specifically. And one of the things that we know from the nature of perception itself, right? We have perceiver, perceived, and perceiving. And we mentioned earlier, I think it was in the last session, that perception can only perceive the perceivable. That which can be perceived is the only object of perception that can be the object of perception. I mean, it's kind of a tautology, really. So perception as a process can't perceive itself, right? Because I can only perceive the perceived, and the process of perception is not an object. Remember, I mentioned earlier that perception as a process has aspects and elements that are, while some aspects of it could be described as thingness and some aspects can be described in terms of change, some aspects have to be described in terms of creation, which is not an observable. So in effect, process is not an observable. Only the outcome of process is an observable. Only the form is observable. The feelings and the energies that compose it, not observable. And physics talks about this in the sense of the property of superposition, the linearity of the nature of light in the equations. So in this sense, when we're looking at looking, the looking passes right through looking. And it looks, and not only that, I don't see the looker either, the perceiver. So in this specific sense, when we think about the scientific method and the epistemic aspects of it, we're basically saying that fundamentally we can only talk about the perceivable. And if we're talking about the symmetric elements of that, the things which are consistently perceivable, then in effect the only thing I can really talk about is the causation parts, the form parts, the existential parts. And therefore I can't really talk about process or interaction directly, and I sure as heck can't talk about creation directly, because creation is neither observable nor repeatable. So in effect, it's fundamentally beyond the nature of the scientific method, right? Since science can't observe it in the here and now, it can't observe it anywhere near to the here and now, but it must account for it being there somehow or another, because obviously there's stuff in interaction. So the net effect is that the process of perception, if I'm constraining it to be only those things which can be perceived, I have to, in a sense, displace the fact of creation as far from the here and now as I possibly can. It's a side effect of the bias built into perception itself. It cannot not seem that creation must have happened long ago and far away. That's why the disconnect. It's built into the nature of perception. But in metaphysics, because metaphysics is starting with this foundational triplication, it accounts for the fact that perception can only perceive the perceivable. But it doesn't disregard those as non-existent or not real. It basically says the reality of the situation is that perceived, perceiver, and perceiving are all three part of the real, even though I can't describe all three as existing. I can only talk about existence in the context of creation and interaction. But when I'm talking about process in the sense of causation or the process of perception, I need all three aspects, even though two of them are neither observable nor repeatable. So in that particular sense, we hold the notion of the integration in a different way, because we're accounting for the foundational triplication as a prior basis, right? Remember in the beginning and last week, I basically said that Western ways of thinking about philosophy start with dualism and material monism. Material monism doesn't have a way of conceiving of the notion of an interaction or creation fundamentally, because it's material monism. It starts with the notion of existence. It starts from a third person perspective. We're all of a sudden starting from a first person perspective, and therefore we get to do different things.